everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty wild.
Yep.
A possible connection between the ancient emerald tablets and the teachings of Jesus.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring a presentation by Billy Carson, who suggests some pretty unexpected links between these two seemingly disparate worlds.
Yeah, it's definitely a thought-provoking topic for sure. I think we're going to be looking at some non-traditional sources and interpretations.
Yeah,
So buckle up.
absolutely.
It's going to be a ride.
One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Jesus is this period between the ages of 12 and 30, often called his missing years.
Right.
The traditional biblical accounts don't tell us much about what he was up to during that time.
Yeah, it's a significant gap for sure. But there are other texts, like the Gospel of the Holy 12, that claim Jesus spent those years traveling and studying in places like Egypt, Tibet, and India.
Now, these texts aren't part of what scholars call the canonical Gospels, which are the books that make up the official New Testament. So there's been a lot of debate over the years about their authenticity and historical accuracy.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the early Christian church had to make decisions about which texts to include in the official Bible and which ones to leave out. So understanding this historical context of those choices is crucial.
Okay, so we have these missing years and these non-canonical Gospels that paint a different picture of Jesus's life. And this is where the Emerald Tablets come in.
Okay.
They're ancient texts attributed to Thoth, an Egyptian figure who's often depicted as a priest king or even a god of wisdom.
Thoth is such a fascinating figure. He's been associated with writing magic and science in ancient Egyptian mythology. And the Emerald Tablets, which are said to contain his teachings, have been a source of fascination for those interested in esoteric or hidden knowledge for centuries.
Now, Billy Carson argues that there are some striking parallels between phrases and concepts found in the Emerald Tablets and those attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. For example, both Thoth and Jesus refer to rivers of living water.
That's right. In the Emerald Tablets, the rivers of living water are associated with the halls of Amenti, a mystical place described as being underground, possibly beneath the Great Pyramid. It's said to be a place of initiation and spiritual rebirth.
And in the Gospel of John, Jesus uses the phrase rivers of living water to refer to the Holy Spirit. So you can see how someone might draw a connection there.
Right.
Another interesting parallel is the use of the term Son of Man. Jesus frequently refers to himself as the Son of Man, and this title has been interpreted in many different ways throughout Christian history. But it's interesting to note that Thoth is also sometimes referred to as the Son of Man, or even the Son of Atlantis, in some esoteric interpretations of the Emerald Tablets. So we have these linguistic echoes. And then Carson takes things a step further.
Okay.
He suggests that Jesus might have actually taught reincarnation, but that this teaching was later suppressed by the early church. He points to passages in the Gospel of the Holy 12 that seem to support this view.
Reincarnation is the idea that the soul is reborn into a new body after death. It's a concept that's found in many different religions and philosophies around the world, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and some ancient Greek philosophical schools.
But it's not typically associated with mainstream Christianity. And Carson argues that this might be because that the early church leaders decided to downplay or even eliminate this teaching from the official doctrine.
It's certainly an intriguing theory if you look at the history of religion. You'll find many instances where certain teachings or interpretations have been emphasized or de-emphasized for various reasons, political, social, or theological. So it's not out of the realm of possibility.
And Carson takes this idea of a hidden lineage even further with his concept of the Morenian bloodline.
Okay.
He claims this special bloodline was passed down through virgin births, starting with Mary's mother, then Mary herself, and culminating in Jesus.
This is where we really start to enter the realm of speculation and alternative history. The concept of special bloodlines or divinely chosen lineages is something you find in many cultures throughout history. Think about royalty, for example, and the idea that certain families were chosen to rule by God or the gods.
Right. Carson even draws a parallel to ancient Sumerian texts, where the goddess Isis uses a similar method to create Adap-Adamu, often interpreted as the first man in Sumerian mythology.
It's a bold claim, and it's important to be cautious about interpreting ancient texts too literally. But it does raise interesting questions about how these ideas of divine lineages and virgin births have been used and understood in different cultures and historical periods.
Now let's dive into something even more mysterious. The halls of Amenti. Thoth, in the Emerald Tablets, describes these halls as being located beneath the Great Pyramid. They're said to contain chambers with the power to renew life, almost like a form of ancient advanced technology.
And Carson suggests that Jesus might have accessed this technology or knowledge to return after his death.
So are we talking about resurrection through some kind of ancient Egyptian tech?
It's a provocative idea for sure. While there's no direct archaeological evidence to support the existence of the halls of Amenti, as described in the Emerald Tablets, the idea of advanced ancient civilizations and lost technologies has captured the imagination of people for centuries.
This is all a lot to take in, I know. We've gone from Jesus's missing years to the Emerald Tablets, reincarnations, secret bloodlines, and now even ancient Egyptian technology.
It's definitely a journey into some unconventional territory, but that's what makes this exploration so fascinating. We're challenging ourselves to think outside the box and consider alternative perspectives.
And we're just getting started. In Part 2, we'll delve deeper into the specific passages from the Emerald Tablets that Carson links to the teachings of Jesus. Stay tuned.
Welcome back.
All right, so we're back for Part 2.
I hope you're ready for more, because we're about to dive into some specific passages from the Emerald Tablets and see how Billy Carson connects them to the teachings of Jesus.
My brain is definitely still processing everything we talked about in Part 1, but I'm eager to see what other intriguing links we can uncover.
Well, one of the passages that Carson highlights is where Thoth describes descending into darkness and ascending into light, multiple times renewing his strength and power with each cycle. This imagery might sound familiar to anyone who's studied religious or spiritual traditions.
Yeah, it reminds me of the concepts of death and resurrection that are so central to Christianity.
Exactly. The idea of dying to the old self and being reborn into a new, more spiritual state is a recurring theme in many mystical and religious traditions. And Carson sees a clear connection here to the story of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection.
So both Thoth and Jesus, in different ways, go through these cycles of death and rebirth, emerging stronger and more enlightened each time.
That's how Carson interprets it. And he also points out that both Thoth and Jesus talk about returning and requiring an accounting from those left behind.
That sounds a lot like the concept of Judgment Day, which is a major theme in Christianity.
Yes, and in the Emerald Tablets as well. The idea that our actions have consequences not just in this life, but potentially in the afterlife or even future lifetimes is a powerful one. It suggests a level of accountability that goes beyond our earthly existence.
And Carson highlights passages from the Gospels of Matthew and Mark that echo this theme of judgment and accountability. He argues that Jesus, like Thoth, emphasized the importance of living a righteous life.
Now, of course, what constitutes a righteous life is open to interpretation. Different religions and philosophies have their own codes of ethics and moral principles. But the idea that there will be some kind of reckoning or evaluation of our actions is a common thread in many belief systems.
Okay, so we've got these parallels in the concepts of death and rebirth, judgment and accountability. But let's circle back to reincarnation for a moment, because that seems to be a key point of connection for Carson. He argues that Jesus actually taught reincarnation more explicitly than is commonly acknowledged, citing passages from the Gospel of the Holy 12 and interpreting certain verses in the Bible as supporting this view.
One of the passages he mentions is in the book of Malachi, where God speaks of sending the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord.
And then in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says that John the Baptist is the fulfillment of that prophecy about Elijah returning.
Right, so Carson sees this as a hint that Jesus was aware of and possibly even teaching the concept of reincarnation, with John the Baptist being a reincarnation of the prophet Elijah.
And this is where things get really interesting, because Carson suggests that the idea of reincarnation might have been intentionally downplayed or even suppressed by the early church.
It's certainly a thought-provoking theory. If you think about it, the idea of reincarnation could potentially undermine certain doctrines or teachings that emphasize the importance of this one life and the need for salvation through a particular set of beliefs or practices.
So if people believe they had multiple lifetimes to get things right, they might not feel the same urgency to conform to a specific religious dogma. It's definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely. And it highlights how religion's ideas and interpretations can evolve and change over time, often influenced by social, political, or even economic factors.
All right, so we've talked about reincarnation and judgment and these broader themes that seem to resonate between the Emerald Tablets and the teachings of Jesus. But what about this whole Murenian bloodline concept? It's pretty out there, even for this deep dive.
It is. But remember, the idea of special bloodlines and divine lineages isn't unique to Billy Carson's interpretation of the Emerald Tablets. It's a concept that's woven throughout human history and mythology.
True. Think about the stories of kings and queens who claim to be descended from gods or goddesses, or the idea of a chosen people in certain religious traditions. These ideas have played a significant role in shaping power structures
Hmm?
and belief systems across cultures.
Exactly. And Carson is essentially arguing that Jesus was part of a special bloodline that was intentionally cultivated to bring forth a being with unique spiritual powers or qualities.
He even compares it to the story of Isis in Sumerian texts, who used a similar method to create Adapa, the first man, in their mythology.
Right. Now, it's important to note that these are all interpretations of ancient texts,
Yeah.
and there's always room for debate and different perspectives. But it's fascinating to explore these connections and see how they might challenge our conventional understanding of history and religion.
Speaking of challenging conventional thinking, let's talk about the connection Carson makes between the matrix and the biblical phrase, openeth the matrix. That's one of the most mind-boggling aspects of his whole presentation.
It is. He argues that this phrase, which appears multiple times in the book of Exodus,
Mhm.
actually refers to a womb and the process of birth.
And he ties this back to the concept of reincarnation, suggesting that being born again might have a literal physical component, not just a spiritual one.
Now, this interpretation is definitely outside the mainstream understanding of those biblical passages, but it does highlight how language can be interpreted in multiple ways and how ancient texts might contain layers of meaning that
Yeah.
we're only beginning to uncover.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion, uncovering new insights with each revelation.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into these connections
Mm-hmm.
between the Emerald Tablets and the teachings of Jesus, we're forced to confront some fundamental questions about life, death, and the nature of reality itself.
Well, I'm definitely ready for more. What other mind-blowing connections await us in part 3? All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Emerald Tablets and Jesus. We've covered a lot of ground, from Jesus's missing years to the Emerald Tablets reincarnation, secret bloodlines, and even a connection to the Matrix.
Right.
Now it's time to try and make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, for sure. So let's take a step back and see if we can distill some of the key takeaways from our exploration.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan. Where do we start?
Well, one of the most striking things about this whole discussion is how it challenges the traditional narrative of Jesus' life and teachings, the Emerald Tablets with their ancient wisdom, and focus on concepts like reincarnation and spiritual evolution, offer a completely different lens through which to view Jesus.
Yeah, it's almost like we're seeing him through a new set of eyes, right? Not just as a figure from a specific religious tradition, but as someone potentially connected to a much broader and older lineage of spiritual knowledge.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key takeaway, the idea that our actions have consequences that extend beyond this one lifetime. Both Thoth and Jesus, in their respective teachings, emphasize the importance of personal responsibility and living a righteous life.
And the concept of Judgment Day, which is present in both the Emerald Tablets and the Bible, really drives home that point. It suggests that we're not just living for this moment, but for something bigger, something that transcends our earthly existence.
Right, whether you interpret Judgment Day literally or metaphorically, it raises profound questions about the nature of the soul, the purpose of life, and what happens after we die.
And speaking of the afterlife, the concept of reincarnation, which is so central to the Emerald Tablets, really challenges the traditional Christian view of heaven and hell. It suggests a cyclical journey of the soul evolving through multiple lifetimes.
Yes, and this idea of reincarnation is something that resonates with many people, even those who might not identify as religious. It offers a different perspective on death, not as an end, but as a transition to a new beginning.
It definitely makes you think about life and death in a whole new way. And then there's the Morenian bloodline concept,
Yeah,
which is probably the most controversial idea we've discussed.
it is. But even if we set aside the specific claim of a bloodline passed down through virgin births, it's interesting to consider how the concept of lineage, both biological and spiritual, has shaped human history and belief systems.
True. Think about how many cultures have stories of heroes or prophets who are said to be descended from gods or other special beings. These narratives often play a role in justifying power structures or establishing a sense of collective identity.
Right. And in the case of Jesus, the idea of a special lineage
Yeah.
connects him to a long history of divine or semi-divine figures who are said to have walked the earth.
Okay, and then there's that wild connection Carson makes between the Matrix and the biblical phrase, openeth the matrix. What are we to make of that?
Well, it's certainly a provocative interpretation. And while it might not be supported by mainstream biblical scholarship, it does encourage us to think about the multiple layers of meaning that can be found in ancient texts.
It also highlights the fact that our interpretations of these texts are often influenced by our own cultural context and contemporary understanding of the world. What might have seemed like a straightforward statement centuries ago could take on a whole new meaning when viewed through the lens of modern ideas like the simulation hypothesis or the concept of a holographic universe.
Exactly, and that's one of the most valuable things about this kind of deep dive. It forces us to confront our own assumptions and consider alternative perspectives.
So where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do with all these mind-blowing connections and challenging ideas?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is different for everyone. This deep dive isn't about providing definitive answers or converting anyone to a particular belief system. It's about expanding our minds, sparking curiosity, and encouraging us to question the narratives we've been given.
It's about embracing the mystery and wonder that lie at the heart of existence and recognizing that there might be more to the story of Jesus, the Emerald Tablets, and even our own lives than we ever imagined.
Beautifully put, and perhaps most importantly, it's about remembering that the journey of discovery is never truly over. There are always more connections to explore, more layers to uncover, and more mysteries to unravel.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this final thought. Could the Emerald Tablets hold a key to understanding the teachings of Jesus in a new light? And what does this mean for our understanding of life, death, and the nature of reality? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries that surround us. You never know what incredible connections you might find.
And that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration.